All right, so in this video, we're going to begin Unit 6. In Unit 6, we'll be taking a look at sensation and perception. And this is kind of like nervous system part 2, basically, dealing with how the nervous system takes in information and then how the brain perceives that information. So what is the difference between sensation and perception? First of all, survival depends on these two things. Sensation is the awareness of stimulus around you. You see these meerkats are aware of something. They're kind of the picture of awareness. They're always standing at attention, wondering what's coming to eat them next. And they're constantly trying to be aware of what's going on in their external environment. But sensation is also the awareness of your internal environment as well, what's going on inside of you. And then perception is when we assign meaning to that. So like I hear a sound in the bushes, then I assign that sensation is just very ambiguous, but the perception of that sound is, oh, I know what that is. That's the dog walking through the bushes. Or if you're a meerkat, you're like, oh crap, there's a dog walking in the bushes. And so there's a different kind of meaning that we assign to that. All right, so just a couple of thoughts here. This idea of the somatosensory system, somato body sensory system. So this is just the senses, the body being able to sense the things that are going on. There are 3 different kinds of receptors: exteroceptors, proprioceptors, and interoceptors. We'll talk about those all. And again, the idea here is that the body is constantly sensing its surroundings and its internal environment. That input is relayed to the brain all the time, except for a few exceptions. And the brain is doing the processing. And in fact, it's being processed the whole way. There's processing that's occurring in the spinal cord and lots of different kinds of processing. All right, so there are 3 levels of this processing. There is receptor level processing or in an integration. There is circuit level, and there is perceptual level. And so we're going to look at the first 2 in this lecture, and we're going to look at perception exclusively in the next lecture. So first, looking at receptor level integration and processing. So understanding at the receptor level, it's just simply receiving that information from the environment or from the internal structures. There is a signal that has to be generated, and that signal, because it's the nervous system, is always going to be an action potential, that electrical impulse. And so the receptors, whatever kinds of receptors they are, we're going to go over those in a second, they are stimulated to the point of causing an action potential, and that action potential is sent from the receptor to the brain. But this is just the receptor level, meaning it's just happening at the reception. And so the stimulus must match the appropriate kind of receptor. For instance, you can't sense light on your skin because your skin doesn't have photoreceptors in it. You can't smell with your eyes. You get the idea. So it has to match. And a lot of times these senses are so acute that they can pinpoint, really broad or versus really specific fields. And so the more specific it is, usually the more accurate the brain can deal with that. All right. And then again, there has to be some sort of energy transfer in this regard. And we're going to talk about those different kinds of receptors, and it'll make more sense then. But this isn't just a general receiving. All the things that we receive require this energy transfer in order to cause that action potential to occur. All right, and there are 2 kinds of receptors. There are phasic and tonic receptors. Phasic receptors are what are called fast adapting receptors, and these are receptors that act quickly and kind of turn off quickly. You think of like pressure, touch, smell, very quick acting, quick adapting, versus a tonic receptor, which is slow. And this is like pain receptors or receptors in our muscles. We'll talk about some of those in a moment. This concept of adaptation when it comes to sensitivity, you all understand this. We become insensitive to the things that are going on around us, meaning that we don't recognize them or we don't notice them anymore because certain kinds of receptor membranes can become less responsive based on the amount of input they're getting versus others that are constantly looking for that input. And that's the difference between the phasic versus the tonic there. All right, so next is the circuit level processing. And the circuit level, it just makes sense. So you have receptor. At the brain, you have integration that has to get from reception to the brain, and that is this circuit level. There's just pathways that are taken. There's first level pathway, and these are actual technical terms, but not that important as far as I'm concerned. There's first level pathway from reception to these nerves, and second level pathway is these nerves all the way up to the brain, and then the third level reception is actually going on in the brain. Third level neurons are going on in the brain. Not that important, but just understanding that this circuit level processing is really simple. It's getting that signal reception all the way to the brain, where the brain can do the processing, and this is what we call perceptual level processing. That's the third level. Again, we'll talk about that in the next lecture. So in this circuit level, you have all the peripheral nervous system nerves. You have the spinal cord also involved in that, getting that up to the brain. And in some places, and sometimes the spinal cord is actually doing integration here as well. All right, so let's look at the different kinds of sensory receptors. Again, all of these kinds of sensory receptors, their main focus is to generate an action potential and send that impulse to the brain so the brain can then perceive that action potential in a certain kind of way. A lot of times these are graded potentials. If you remember that from the last unit, these are graded potentials, and a graded potential can cause an action potential if that stimulus is enough. And so we become aware of these sensations when that potential actually fires and is sent to the brain. All right, here are the different kinds. You can see them there. There is the nociceptors, and these are pain receptors. And pain, well, we're going to spend more time talking about pain, but it can be received in lots of different ways. You think about all the different kinds of ways that you receive pain, like pressure, heat, cold. There's all these different ways. Thermoreceptors, these respond to temperature changes. Chemoreceptors, these respond to chemicals. This is like smell and taste. And you'll notice that pain is on thermo and chemo and just straight up nociceptors. Mechanoreceptors, this responds to pressure, touch, vibration, stretching. This would be like our skin and our ears even. And then down there at the bottom is photoreceptors. This is like vision. They respond to light. And so notice all of those things, temperature, chemicals, mechanical, light, these are all forms of energy. The pain receptors are a little bit different because of the way that they are, the way that they work in the system. Again, we'll talk about that in the next lecture. And let's look at those three types of receptors I mentioned earlier. First, exteroceptors. I bet you can figure out where they go just by looking at the word. These are external receptors. They respond to stimuli arising outside the body. This is like touch, temperature, hearing. This is our most specialized sensory organs, eyes, those sorts of things. The internal receptors, these are, sometimes you'll see them called visceroreceptors because it has to do with our viscera, which is like our guts, basically. These respond to internal things that we don't really even perceive to be going on. You perceive them as something like hunger or tired or that sort of thing. But these are, the body is changing blood pressure or temperature, blood sugar levels, all those sorts of things. And this is the types of receptors that you receive in this regard. And then lastly, the one that we don't really think about a whole lot is proprioceptors. And so I love this picture because it kind of gives you this idea of what a proprioceptor is. This is your skeletal muscles, tendons, joints, ligaments, connective tissues, all that sort of thing. They respond in a different way. And so like this part shows them catching some apples or onions or something in a Walmart bag. And when you catch that, you know that if you just leave your arms limp, it's going to like, you're going to drop the bag. Your arms are going to go down. You get it. So you like tighten up your muscles in order to respond to the weight change that is happening there. And so this is a proprioceptors. These are your muscles responding to change.